I'm Brian Lee Crowley, the Managing Director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, an independent and nonpartisan public policy institute based here in the nation's capital. Every Remembrance Day, Canadians rightly gather in front of memorials just like this magnificent one here in Ottawa to honour the sacrifice of many valiant compatriots over years and decades past. But we too often forget that remembrance of past deeds carries with it an obligation today. We must care for our veterans and their families. We must uphold the contract between society and those who served in the past and renew that contract with those who serve today and will be asked to serve tomorrow. One reason we occasionally falter in honoring our debt is that we do not understand why the sacrifices of those who died, were maimed in body or spirit, or simply risked those terrible things, is so important to us and to many others around the world. So let me pass on a story, the story of a good friend brought to Canada as a child from the Holland of his birth, to explain what kind of men and women we sent overseas in the past, have overseas today, and will need to send again. It was Canadian troops who liberated the Netherlands from Nazi occupation in World War II. A difficult job carried out with typical Canadian effectiveness and self-effacement, despite considerable losses in flat, wet terrain that offered little shelter from enemy fire to wet, dirty, and often exhausted soldiers. Shortly afterward, my friend's Dutch father met a Canadian soldier in the road, stopped him, and said, "You don't know me, and I don't know you, but I know who you are and what you represent. You and your fellow Canadians came from across the Atlantic from far away, knowing nothing of my country and having little at stake here. At great expense in blood and treasure, you have freed us from cruel oppression, and I imagine that you have lost friends and colleagues in the effort. The least I can do is to tell you how deeply grateful my fellow countrymen and I are for what you have done for us." The Canadian looked at him calmly, smiled, and said, "No need to thank me, sir. We had a job to do, and we did it." Then he saluted and carried on down the road, while my friend's father went home. When he got home, he announced to his family, "I think we've found the country where we must go to live." My friend is Peter Stauffer, now a distinguished member of the Canadian Parliament and a keen advocate of the rights and honours due to veterans. And his story reminds me too of Colonel Pat Stogren, Canada's retiring ombudsman for our veterans. He too had a job to do and did it with quiet, dutiful determination. But it's a job that each of us must take on for ourselves. The question every Canadian must ask themselves is, why was that Canadian in the road? Not just to fight the enemy. He and his comrades were there to defend the moral principles on which our society is based. Values like individual freedom, democracy, the rule of law. Each and every one of those soldiers was prepared to put his life, his hopes, his dreams, and his family's future on the line to uphold those principles, fighting for a home and a community as well as a country, and for a precious way of life. They did so on behalf of all Canadians. And when we, as citizens, ask some of our fellows to take such risks and make such sacrifices, we assume a debt of honor to all who serve, to those who return, as well as to those who did not. We must care for them and their families as needed. So let me add my voice to Pat Stogren's in calling on Ottawa to fulfill our moral and practical obligations by ensuring that the treatment of our veterans is based on the highest Canadian standards of decency, of generosity, and of fairness. The moral obligation, I trust, is clear, but the practical one matters too. The world is not a safe place. If and when we must ask such sacrifices again, it must be very clear that we understand and will keep the commitment that necessarily accompanies that request. Safety and honor alike demand it on November 11th and every other day. I'm Brian Lee Crowley for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Thank you.